Charles Manson, an American criminal and musician, led the Manson family, a California-based cult in the late 1960s. In July and August 1969, some members of the cult committed a series of 9 murders at 4 different locations. Manson was convicted in 1971 of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder for the deaths of 7 people, including actress Sharon Tate. Although Manson did not directly order the murders, the prosecution argued that his ideology constituted a conspiratorial act. Before the murders, Manson had spent a significant portion of his life in correctional institutions. He gained a following by associating with the Los Angeles music industry, particularly through his connection with Dennis Wilson of the Beach Boys, who introduced him to record producer Terry Melcher. In 1968, the Beach Boys recorded one of Manson's songs titled, "Cease to Exist," later renamed, "Never Learn Not to Love." Manson tried unsuccessfully to secure a record contract through Melcher. Manson often discussed the Beatles and their self-titled 1968 album. According to the Los Angeles County District Attorney, Manson believed he was guided by the Beatles' lyrics and used the term, "helter skelter," to describe an impending apocalyptic race war. During his trial, it was argued that Manson intended to incite a race war, although Manson and others disputed this claim. Some interviews and trial testimonies suggested that the Tate LaBianca murders were imitative acts meant to exonerate Manson's friend Bobby Beausoleil. Manson himself denied instructing anyone to commit murder. Charles Manson was born on November 12, 1934, in Cincinnati, Ohio, to Kathleen Maddox. His biological father, Colonel Walker Henderson Scott Sr., was involved in a paternity suit that resulted in an agreed judgment in 1937. However, Manson may never have known his biological father. After Manson's birth, Kathleen married William Eugene Manson, but they divorced in 1937. Charles retained his stepfather's last name. Manson was placed in the care of his aunt and uncle in West Virginia, while his mother served time in prison for assault and robbery. She was paroled in 1942, and Manson described this period as the happiest time of his life. Following her release, the family moved to Charleston, West Virginia, where Manson frequently skipped school and his mother struggled with alcoholism. She was arrested for grand larceny but was not convicted. The family later relocated to Indianapolis, where Kathleen married an alcoholic man named Lewis, whom she met through Alcoholics Anonymous in August 1943. In an interview with Diane Sawyer, Manson revealed that at the age of 9, he set his school on fire. He also had a history of truancy and petty theft. Due to a lack of foster home placements, Manson was placed in the Gibault School for Boys in Indiana at the age of 13. The school, run by Catholic priests, had strict disciplinary measures, including beatings with a wooden paddle or leather strap. Manson often ran away from the school, seeking shelter in the woods or under bridges. Manson returned home to his mother in McMechen, spending Christmas 1947 with his aunt and uncle. However, he was eventually sent back to Gibault. After 10 months, Manson ran away again, this time to Indianapolis. In 1948, he committed his first known crime by robbing a grocery store. Initially driven by the need for food, Manson discovered a sum of money and took it. He used the money to rent a room and buy food while living on Skid Row. For a brief period, Manson worked for Western Union delivering messages, attempting to live a crime-free life. However, he resorted to petty theft to supplement his income. He was caught and sent to Boys Town, a juvenile facility in Omaha, Nebraska, by a sympathetic judge in 1949. After 4 days at Boys Town, Manson and another student stole a car and obtained a gun. They embarked on a journey to Peoria, Illinois, where they committed armed robberies at the instruction of the other student's uncle, a professional thief. Manson was arrested during a raid on a Peoria store 2 weeks later, linking him to the earlier armed robberies. He was then sent to the Indiana Boys School, a strict reform school. Manson faced various abuses at the school, including alleged sexual assault by other students with the encouragement of a staff member, as well as repeated beatings. He attempted to escape from the school 18 times. During his time there, Manson developed a defense mechanism known as the insane game, where he would act deranged to deter attackers when he was unable to physically defend himself. After several failed attempts, Manson successfully escaped with 2 other boys in February 1951. The trio engaged in car theft and robberies as they made their way to California but were eventually arrested in Utah. Manson was sent to the National Training School for Boys in Washington, D.C., where he was classified as illiterate but with an above-average IQ of 109. His caseworker described him as aggressively antisocial. Following a psychiatrist's recommendation, Manson was transferred to the Natural Bridge Honor Camp, a minimum security institution, in October 1951. His aunt offered to support him and let him stay at her house upon his release. Manson had a parole hearing scheduled for February 1952. However, in January, he was caught raping a boy at knife point, leading to his transfer to the Federal Reformatory in Petersburg, Virginia. There, he committed additional serious disciplinary offenses, including homosexual acts. He was subsequently moved to a maximum security reformatory in Chillicothe, Ohio, where he was expected to stay until his 21st birthday in November 1955. Due to good behavior, Manson was released early in May 1954 and went to live with his aunt and uncle in McMechen. In January 1955, Manson married Rosalie Jean Willis, a hospital waitress. Around 3 months later, after arriving in Los Angeles in a stolen car with his pregnant wife, Manson was charged with a federal crime for transporting the vehicle across state lines. Following a psychiatric evaluation, he received 5 years probation. However, Manson's failure to appear in court for a similar charge in Florida led to his arrest in Indianapolis in March 1956. His probation was revoked, and he was sentenced to 3 years imprisonment at Terminal Island in Los Angeles. During Manson's imprisonment, his wife gave birth to their son, Charles Manson Jr. While at Terminal Island, Manson received visits from his wife and mother, who were living together in Los Angeles. However, in March 1957, Manson's wife stopped visiting, and his mother informed him that Rosalie was involved with another man. Shortly before a scheduled parole hearing, Manson attempted to escape by stealing a car. As a result, he received 5 more years of probation, and his parole was denied. Manson was granted 5 years of parole in September 1958, the same year his divorce from Rosalie was finalized. By November, he had begun pimping a 16-year-old girl and was receiving support from another girl with wealthy parents. In September 1959, he pleaded guilty to attempting to cash a forged U.S. Treasury check, which he claimed to have stolen from a mailbox, although the latter charge was dropped. He received a 10-year suspended sentence in probation after a woman named Leona made an emotional plea in court, professing her love for Manson and their intention to marry. They did marry before the year ended, possibly to avoid her testimony against him. Manson took Leona and another woman to New Mexico for purposes of prostitution, which led to his questioning for violating the Mann Act. Although he was released, Manson suspected that the investigation was ongoing. He violated his probation by disappearing, resulting in a bench warrant being issued. In April 1960, he was indicted for violating the Mann Act. After being arrested in June in Laredo, Texas, Manson was returned to Los Angeles. He was ordered to serve his 10-year sentence for violating probation on the check-cashing charge. Manson spent a year unsuccessfully attempting to appeal the revocation of his probation. In July 1961, he was transferred to the United States Penitentiary at McNeil Island, Washington. During his time there, he received guitar lessons from Alvin "Creepy" Karpis, leader of the Barker Karpis gang, and obtained a contact name at Universal Studios, Phil Kaufman, from another inmate. His mother moved to Washington state to be closer to him during his incarceration. Although the Mann Act charge had been dropped, Manson's attempt to cash the Treasury check remained a federal offense. His annual reviews in September 1961 and 1964 noted his desire for attention. In 1963, Manson's divorce from Leona was finalized, and she claimed they had a son named Charles Luther. The rumor that Manson auditioned for the Monkees in 1965 is refuted by his continued incarceration at McNeil Island. In June 1966, he was sent back to Terminal Island in preparation for early release. On March 21, 1967, Manson was released after spending more than half of his 32 years in various institutions. He requested permission to stay, stating that prison had become his home. Shortly after being released from prison in 1967, Manson relocated from Los Angeles to Berkeley, potentially violating his probation. However, he promptly contacted the San Francisco Probation Office upon his arrival and was transferred to the supervision of Roger Smith, a federal probation officer and criminology doctoral researcher. Smith worked at the Haight-Ashbury Free Medical Clinic, HAFMC, where Manson and his family became regular visitors. Both Roger Smith and the clinic's founder, David E. Smith, received funding from the National Institutes of Health and reportedly the CIA to study the impact of drugs like LSD and methamphetamine on the counterculture movement in Haight-Ashbury. Manson and his predominantly female followers became subjects of their research, attending regular appointments with Roger Smith. Under Roger Smith's permission, Manson relocated from Berkeley to the Haight-Ashbury district in San Francisco. It was during this time that he first experimented with LSD and continued to use it frequently. According to David Smith, Manson's personality underwent a drastic change, which Roger Smith considered the most abrupt transformation he had witnessed in his professional career. Manson also read the science fiction novel, Stranger in a Strange Land, by Robert A. Heinlein. Inspired by the atmosphere of free love prevailing in Haight-Ashbury during the Summer of Love, Manson developed his own philosophy, blending elements from Stranger in a Strange Land, the Bible, Scientology, Dale Carnegie, and the music of the Beatles. This philosophy quickly gained him a following. At UC Berkeley, Manson gained his first follower, librarian Mary Brunner, whom he convinced to let him stay at her house temporarily. However, the arrangement quickly became permanent. Manson then encountered runaway teen Lynette, Squeaky, Fromm and convinced her to join him and Brunner. As Manson's influence grew, he attracted larger crowds and a dedicated group of followers. He targeted emotionally insecure individuals and social outcasts for manipulation. According to David Smith's book, Love Needs Care, about the HAFMC, Manson sought to reprogram his followers' minds, using LSD and unconventional sexual practices, to make them empty vessels, obedient to his will. Manson orchestrated group LSD trips, taking lower doses himself to remain in control. Manson's parole officer, Roger Smith, and many HAFMC staff members were aware of his growing following, which consisted of approximately 20 followers by the time he left the Haight in April 1968. Among the core members of Manson's following were Charles Tex Watson, a musician and former actor; Bobby Beausoleil, a former musician and pornographic actor; Mary Brunner, Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Leslie Van Houten. Under the supervision of his parole officer Roger Smith, Manson continued to expand his family through drug use and involvement in prostitution, seemingly without intervention from the authorities. On July 31, 1967, Manson was arrested for attempting to impede the arrest of one of his followers, Ruth Ann Morehouse. However, rather than being sent back to prison, the charge was reduced to a misdemeanor, and Manson received 3 additional years of probation. He managed to evade prosecution once again in July 1968 when he and his family were arrested while moving from San Francisco to Los Angeles with the permission of Roger Smith. Their bus crashed into a ditch, and police discovered Manson, Brunner, Manson's newborn baby, and other family members sleeping naked. Manson was arrested but released a few days later, this time on a drug-related charge. Manson's fixation on an impending race war between black and white Americans transformed the Manson family into a doomsday cult. Embracing white supremacist beliefs, Manson propagated the notion that black individuals would initiate a violent uprising, eliminating all white individuals except himself and his followers. He claimed that the black community lacked the intelligence to survive independently and would require a white leader, with Manson assuming the role of their master. Around late 1968, Manson began using the term, Helter Skelter, derived from a song on the Beatles' White Album, to symbolize this anticipated war, as described by Vincent Bugliosi. In early August 1969, some Manson family members committed murders in Los Angeles. The Manson family gained national notoriety after the murder of actress Sharon Tate and 4 others in her home on August 8 and 9, 1969, and Leno and Rosemary LaBianca the next day. Tex Watson and 3 other members of the family committed the Tate-LaBianca murders, allegedly under Manson's instructions. While it was later accepted at trial that Manson never expressly ordered the murders, his behavior was deemed to warrant a conviction of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. Evidence pointed to Manson's obsession with inciting a race war by killing those he thought were pigs, and his belief that this would show the nigger how to do the same. Family members were also responsible for other assaults, thefts, crimes, and the attempted assassination of President Gerald Ford in Sacramento by Lynette Squeaky Fromm. While it is often thought that Manson never murdered or attempted to murder anyone himself, true crime writer James Buddy Day, in his book Hippie Cult Leader, The Last Words of Charles Manson, claimed that Manson shot drug dealer Bernard Crowe on July 1, 1969. Crowe survived. Manson and his co-defendants, Leslie Van Houten, Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Tex Watson, extradited from Texas, were tried by the state of California for the Tate and LaBianca murders. The trial commenced on July 15, 1970. Manson, donning his typical fringed buckskin attire, appeared with an X carved into his forehead on July 24, 1970, the first day of testimony. His co-defendants, Van Houten, Atkins, and Krenwinkel, also displayed carved X marks on their foreheads in court. Outside the courthouse, members of the Manson family camped and held a vigil on a street corner since they were barred from the courtroom due to their disruptive behavior. Some followers even carved crosses into their heads. On a particular day, certain members wore saffron robes, claiming that they would self-immolate if Manson were convicted, drawing inspiration from Vietnamese monks and nuns protesting the Vietnam War. During the trial, the state presented numerous witnesses, with Linda Kasabian being the primary witness. Kasabian had been present during the Tate murders on August 8–9, 1969, and provided detailed testimony about the gruesome events she witnessed from outside the house. She also testified that Manson had ordered the LaBianca killings, as she was with him in the car on the following evening. Kasabian endured days of cross-examination by the defense attorneys. After testifying, she went into hiding for the next 4 decades. In early August 1970, President Richard Nixon expressed his belief that Manson was guilty of the murders, either directly or indirectly. Manson obtained a newspaper with the headline and displayed it to the jury. This led the defense attorneys to request a mistrial, arguing that their clients were accused of fewer deaths than Nixon's war machine in Vietnam. Judge Charles H. Older polled each juror to determine if they had seen the headline and if it affected their ability to make an impartial decision. All jurors affirmed their ability to decide independently. Shortly after, the female defendants, Atkins, Krenwinkel, and Van Houten, were removed from the room for chanting, "Nixon says we are guilty." So why go on? On October 5, 1970, Manson attempted to attack Judge Older in the presence of the jury. He threatened the judge and then leapt over his lawyer's table with a sharpened pencil, targeting Older. Manson was restrained before reaching the judge. As he was being escorted out of the courtroom, Manson shouted, "In the name of Christian justice, someone should cut your head off." Meanwhile, the female defendants began chanting in Latin. Following the incident, Judge Older started wearing a .38 caliber pistol during the trial. On November 16, 1970, the state of California concluded its case after presenting 22 weeks' worth of evidence. The defendants surprised the courtroom by announcing that they had no witnesses to present and rested their case. Immediately after the defense counsel rested their case, the 3 female defendants expressed their desire to testify, claiming that Manson had no involvement in the murders. However, their attorneys opposed their client's testimony and informed the court about their opposition in chambers. The next day, Manson himself announced his intention to testify. The judge allowed Manson to give his testimony outside the presence of the jury. Manson made the following statements. "These children that come at you with knives, they are your children. You taught them. I didn't teach them. I just tried to help them stand up. Most of the people at the ranch that you call the family were just people that you did not want." Manson went on to draw parallels between his actions and those of society as a whole. "I know this. That in your hearts and your souls, you are as much responsible for the Vietnam War as I am for killing these people. ... I can't judge any of you. I have no malice against you and no ribbons for you. But I think that it is high time that you all start looking at yourselves, and judging the lie that you live in." Manson concluded by asserting that he, too, was a product of a system he viewed as inherently violent and unjust. "My father is the jailhouse. My father is your system. I am only what you made me. I am only a reflection of you. You want to kill me? Ha! I am already dead, have been all my life. I've spent 23 years in tombs that you have built." After Manson finished speaking, Judge Older offered him the opportunity to testify before the jury, but Manson declined, stating that it was unnecessary. He then informed the female defendants that their testimony was no longer needed. On November 30, 1970, Ronald Hughes, Leslie Van Houten's attorney, failed to appear for the closing arguments in the trial. Hughes was later found dead in a decomposed state in a California state park. The cause of his death could not be determined. Hughes had disagreed with Manson during the trial and had taken the position that his client should not testify to absolve Manson of any involvement in the murders. Some have speculated that Hughes may have been murdered by the Manson family. On January 25, 1971, the jury delivered their verdict, finding Manson, Krenwinkel, and Atkins guilty of first-degree murder in all 7 of the Tate and LaBianca killings. Van Houten was also found guilty of first-degree murder specifically in relation to the LaBianca killings. After the guilty verdicts, a separate hearing was held before the same jury to determine the defendants' sentences, including the possibility of the death penalty. During the sentencing hearings, the 3 female defendants, Atkins, Van Houten, and Krenwinkel, testified that Manson was not involved in the murders and provided graphic details of the crimes. They claimed that the murders were carried out to aid Bobby Beausoleil, a Manson family member imprisoned for another murder. The female defendants stated that the Tate-LaBianca murders were meant to mimic the previous killing. They attributed their actions to the influence of Linda Kasabian, the state's key witness. None of the defendants expressed remorse for the killings. On March 4, 1971, Manson shaved his head and fashioned his beard into a fork, proclaiming himself to be the devil. However, the female defendants initially did not shave their heads, possibly to avoid appearing completely controlled by Manson as they had during the trial when they carved X marks on their foreheads. On March 29, 1971, the jury sentenced all 4 defendants to death. Upon entering the courtroom, the female defendants had also shaved their heads, following Manson's lead. After the sentence was read, Atkins shouted a provocative statement to the jury. The Manson murder trial lasted for a record-breaking 9.5 months, earning it the title of the longest murder trial in American history at that time. It received immense media attention and was commonly referred to as the trial of the century. The jury was sequestered for an unprecedented 225 days, and the trial transcript itself filled 209 volumes or 31,716 pages. Manson was received into state prison on April 22, 1971, from Los Angeles County, facing charges of 7 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of conspiracy to commit murder. These charges were related to the deaths of Abigail Ann Folger, Wojciech Frykowski, Stephen Earl Parent, Sharon Tate Polanski, Jay Sebring, and Leno and Rosemary LaBianca. However, due to the ruling that the death penalty was unconstitutional in 1972, Manson's sentence was changed to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole. This modification occurred on February 2, 1977. Furthermore, on December 13, 1971, Manson was found guilty of first-degree murder in Los Angeles County Court for the killing of musician Gary Hinman on July 25, 1969. He was also convicted of first-degree murder for the death of Donald Jerome, Shorty Shea in August 1969. Following the 1972 ruling of California v. Anderson, which deemed California's death sentences unconstitutional, Manson became eligible to petition for writ of habeas corpus and request a modification of his sentence to life imprisonment. The court stated that prisoners previously sentenced to death could seek alternative punishments specified by law. Manson became eligible for parole after 7 years of imprisonment. His first parole hearing took place on November 16, 1978, at California Medical Facility in Vacaville, but his petition was denied. During the 1980s, Charles Manson participated in 4 interviews with the mainstream media. The first interview took place at California Medical Facility and was aired on June 13, 1981, as part of Tom Snyder's NBC show, The Tomorrow Show. The second interview occurred at San Quentin State Prison and was broadcast on March 7, 1986, with Charlie Rose for CBS News Nightwatch. This interview won the National News Emmy Award for Best Interview in 1987. In 1988, Manson was interviewed by Geraldo Rivera as part of Rivera's primetime special on Satanism. In these interviews, Manson's forehead displayed a swastika in the same location where the X carved during his trial had been. In 1989, Nicholas Schreck conducted an interview with Manson for his documentary titled Charles Manson Superstar. Schreck concluded that Manson was not insane but rather acting that way out of frustration. On September 25, 1984, while imprisoned at the California Medical Facility in Vacaville, Manson was attacked by inmate Jan Holmstrom, who poured paint thinner on him and set him on fire. Manson suffered second- and third-degree burns on over 20% of his body. Holmstrom explained that Manson had objected to his Hare Krishna chants and verbally threatened him. After 1989, Manson was housed in the Protective Housing Unit at California State Prison, Corcoran, which accommodated inmates at risk of harm in the general population housing. He had also been held at San Quentin State Prison, California Medical Facility in Vacaville, Folsom State Prison, and Pelican Bay State Prison. In June 1997, Manson faced disciplinary action for drug trafficking, resulting in his transfer from Corcoran State Prison to Pelican Bay State Prison a month later. On September 5, 2007, MSNBC aired The Mind of Manson, a complete version of a 1987 interview conducted at San Quentin State Prison in California. The original footage, featuring an unshackled, unapologetic, and unruly Manson, had been considered so extraordinary that only 7 minutes of it were initially broadcast on Today. In June 2011, a photograph of Manson was released to the public by California corrections officials. The image displayed Manson with a receding hairline, grizzled gray beard and hair, and the swastika tattoo still prominently visible on his forehead. In 2010, the Los Angeles Times reported that Manson had been found in possession of a cell phone in 2009 and had made contacts in California, New Jersey, Florida, and British Columbia. The California Department of Corrections spokesperson stated that it was unclear whether Manson had used the phone for illegal activities. Additionally, Manson recorded an album titled Completion, featuring acoustic pop songs with additional production by Henry Rollins. However, only 5 copies of the album were pressed, with 2 belonging to Rollins and the remaining 3 presumed to be in Manson's possession. The album has never been officially released. On January 1, 2017, Manson was hospitalized at Mercy Hospital in Bakersfield due to gastrointestinal bleeding while being held at Corcoran Prison. Reports indicated that he was seriously ill and deemed too weak for surgery. He returned to prison on January 6, and the details of his treatment were undisclosed. On November 19, 2017, Manson died at the hospital from cardiac arrest resulting from respiratory failure caused by colon cancer. Following his death, 3 individuals expressed their intention to claim Manson's estate and body. Manson's grandson Jason Freeman sought possession of his remains and personal belongings. Manson's pen pal Michael Channels claimed to possess a 2002 will in which Manson left his entire estate and body to Channels. Ben Gurecki, a friend of Manson, presented a 2017 will designating Matthew Roberts, another alleged son of Manson, as the beneficiary of the estate and body. A DNA test conducted by CNN in 2012 revealed that Freeman and Roberts were not related. Previous attempts to match Roberts' DNA with Manson's genetic material were reportedly unsuccessful due to contamination. On March 12, 2018, the Kern County Superior Court ruled in favor of Freeman, granting him possession of Manson's body. Freeman had Manson cremated on March 20, 2018. As of February 7, 2020, Channels and Freeman continued their legal battle over Manson's estate, with Channels seeking Freeman's DNA for testing purposes. Manson embraced Scientology during his time in prison with the help of inmate Lanier Rayner. In July 1961, he officially declared his religion as Scientology. Prison reports from September 1961 noted that Manson had gained some insight into his personal issues through his study of Scientology. However, an August 1966 report indicated that Manson no longer supported or practiced Scientology. After his release from prison in 1967, Manson made his way to Los Angeles, where he reportedly interacted with local Scientologists and attended parties attended by movie stars. During this time, he underwent 150 hours of auditing, a practice used in Scientology. Manson's close associate Bruce M. Davis, often referred to as his right-hand man, worked at the Church of Scientology headquarters in London from November 1968 to April 1969. In 2009, disc jockey Matthew Roberts claimed that he might be Charles Manson's biological son and released correspondence and evidence to support his claim. According to Roberts' biological mother, she was a former member of the Manson family who left in 1967 after being assaulted by Manson. She returned to her parents' home, gave birth to Roberts on March 22, 1968, and placed him for adoption. However, a DNA test conducted in 2012 between Roberts and Manson's known biological grandson, Jason Freeman, revealed that they were not biologically related. Roberts then pursued a direct DNA test with Manson, which definitively confirmed that Manson was not his father. In 2014, Manson, while still imprisoned, became engaged to 26-year-old Afton Elaine Burton, who was also known as Star. They obtained a marriage license in November of that year. Burton had been visiting Manson in prison for several years and maintained websites proclaiming his innocence. However, the wedding did not take place as the marriage license expired in February 2015. Journalist Daniel Simone reported that the wedding was called off after Manson discovered that Burton intended to marry him solely to use his corpse as a tourist attraction after his death, along with her friend Craig Hammond. According to Simone, Manson used the possibility of marriage to keep Burton and Hammond visiting him. Burton claimed on her website that the marriage was postponed due to logistical reasons, stating that Manson's infection and his confinement in a prison medical facility prevented the marriage from taking place. She expressed hope that the marriage license would be renewed and the ceremony would eventually occur. On April 11, 2012, Charles Manson was denied release at his 12th parole hearing, which he chose not to attend. Following his parole hearing on March 27, 1997, Manson refused to participate in any subsequent hearings. The parole panel highlighted Manson's history of controlling behavior, as well as his mental health issues, including schizophrenia and paranoid delusional disorder. They deemed him too dangerous to be released. The panel also pointed out that Manson had accumulated 108 rules violation reports, showed no signs of remorse, lacked understanding of the severity of his crimes, displayed a callous disregard for human suffering, and had no plans for parole. At the April 11, 2012, hearing, it was determined that Manson would not be eligible for parole reconsideration for another 15 years, meaning not before 2027 when he would have been 92 years old. Recent research analyzing Manson's psychological state challenges the diagnosis of schizophrenia and suggests that he may have had bipolar disorder and psychopathy instead. In June 1970, Rolling Stone featured Manson as their cover story. There were controversial remarks made in relation to the Tate murders, including Bernardine Dorn of the Weather Underground allegedly stating, "Dig it, first they killed those pigs, then they ate dinner in the same room with them, then they even shoved a fork into a victim's stomach." Wild. James Mason, an ardent Manson follower, claimed to have acted on Manson's suggestion and founded the neo-Nazi group called the Universal Order, which has had an influence on other movements like the Atomwaffen Division, a terrorist group. According to Bugliosi, a BBC employee claimed the existence of a neo-Manson cult in Europe, with around 70 rock bands performing songs by Manson or expressing support for him.